In 1993, Emma Jayne Magson was only 8 months old when her dad locked her mom in the flat. He attacked her with a knife in front of both Emma and her older sister, Charlotte. We're not going into great detail about that, but it was a very brutal attack and it was definitely an attempt to take a life. But they did all survive. From then on, Emma, her mom and her sister moved around a lot, and they eventually settled in a safe house. Emma and her sister Charlotte had a really close relationship. It was them against the world. They did everything together, including share a bedroom. But then at the age of 7, Emma's already very unstable life would be shattered when her sister Charlotte died from the complications of the surgery. She was only 9 years old. Their grief-stricken mom then made the decision to bring Charlotte's body back to their family home for 2 weeks. For the first week, Charlotte's body stayed in her mom's bedroom. For the second week, she remained downstairs in an open casket. This is something that Emma's mom has later said that she deeply regrets, and in the midst of her soul-destroying grief, she was only thinking about herself. Although for all intents Emma had been a quiet child who was bullied throughout school, as many people do, when she turned into a teen, she started rebelling. It was just the usual attention-craving rebellion, coming home drunk at 13 and just acting out. And although the family had been away from Emma's abusive dad, her mum's subsequent relationships also entailed violence and abuse, which Emma quite often witnessed. And as we know is often the case, Emma found herself in the same vicious cycle. She also entered abusive relationships in which she was the victim, to the extent that one of Emma's partners fractured her skull and put her in hospital, and she had a leak on the brain. At 21-year-old, Emma had a daughter, but even that wasn't a happy chapter in Emma's life. Apparently the birth was traumatic and she suffered postnatal depression. It was a year later, in autumn 2015, that Emma met James Knight. They got together at about the same time that James had ended a relationship with the mom of his 2 children. Due to the breakup, James was living with his brother Kevin on Sylvan Street in Leicester, and Emma was living just a few doors down with her daughter. James Knight was a bin man, and his work colleague and friend said he was a family man with lots of friends. James had a very good group of friends. He was popular in and amongst his mates, and at work. Whenever he wasn't working with me, people always wanted to work with him, because they knew they could have a laugh and he would get the work done. When we first got together, James looked really happy and bubbly, and like he was moving on with his life, and just seemed really happy and settled. This friend also said that he knew that they'd been arguing, but he just put that down to settling in disagreements. I've seen him have an argument once where it got quite heated, but in my opinion, they both gave as good as they got. I've never seen either of them be violent towards each other. But Emma's mum, on the other hand, felt that Emma changed as the relationship went on. She claims James wanted her to stay at home, and James didn't want her to wear makeup. And as you'll see, those two opposing views have a major role in this case. It's claimed that their relationship was very volatile. Emma's side claims that James was physically and emotionally abusive towards Emma, with Emma's mum claiming that Emma always had bruises that she'd see and she'd ask about, but Emma would just fob them off as a result of play fighting. Then on the other side, James's family say that he weren't a violent person. His mum said James has no history of violence towards women. James was with his previous girlfriend for 9 years, who he's got 2 children with, and there was no violence in that relationship. James could shout. If James lost his temper, he would hit a wall rather than hit somebody. Now, other than the victim impact statement, I couldn't really find all that much from James's ex, but she did tell the Sun newspaper that at the start of their relationship, James was a real romantic, and he was an amazing dad to their daughters. However, towards the end of their relationship, she discovered that he'd been smoking cannabis and taking steroids, and as a result, he became a far cry from the man I fell in love with. It caused row after row, and no matter how much I begged him to stop, he didn't listen. This would be a great time to do the disclaimers. So while you're watching this, please bear in mind this is a true crime case. It's a real story involving real people. Them real people have real families. So although I do want you to comment, and I do want you to share, please do so with sensitivity. And because of that disclaimer, and the conflicting information about Emma and James, I'm going to be even stricter in this video on myself to make sure I leave out all my thoughts until the very end, all my opinions. None of it's going to come out until the very end, to make sure you only get the information that's come out, that's been reported, what's been said in court, delivered in the most unbiased possible way that I can muster. It's reported that very early on, or even straight away in their relationship, that James moved in with Emma and a daughter at 25 Sylvan Street, Leicester. That being said, he would leave for short periods after arguments. Then in early March 2016, Emma suffered a miscarriage, and again, nothing ever seems to be straightforward in Emma's life. Even this miscarriage was extra brutal compared to usual. She had to go back to the hospital because the operation to remove the baby didn't work as planned. And according to Emma's mom, Emma said that James blamed her for losing the baby. But James's mom, on the other hand, says that she never heard him say that. She knew that he was thrilled to be having another baby, and that he was angry for the both of them that they lost it. Now, there's a lot of things that Emma's mom says that portrays James to be abusive, and then pretty much every time James's mom denies it. And by no means am I saying that I don't believe these things, but I am going to skip them, purely because I refuse to write a case based on he said, she said. I've already said that Emma's side claims that James were abusive, and James's mom denies it. I don't need to keep back and forthing between third-party claims. Just over a week after this miscarriage, the couple exchanged text messages in which Emma said to James, "We ain't good for each other. I'm no good for you. Take care." And he replied, "That's cool. I'm not there for you to speak to like shh and hit." According to Emma, that reference of being hit was in relation to an incident where she swung her arm and whacked him on the head. On the 26th of March 2016, just 2 weeks after the miscarriage, both Emma and James had been out drinking separately. They were drinking with their own friends. They'd been in touch throughout the afternoon by phone, and then they met in a pub in Leicester city centre at about midnight. Some point after, James was then asked by the security to leave the pub because of his behaviour. Now, I don't know for certain why he was asked to leave the pub, what the behaviour was, but some of the sources have claimed that it's because the doormen or somebody else were looking at Emma. But this incident did involve the police. The police were called, they spoke to James, but ultimately he was allowed to leave. So Emma and James got a taxi together and went home. However, inside the taxi, they started arguing. And I don't mean they had a disagreement. Their behaviour in the taxi was that bad. Their argument was that bad. The driver pulled up and asked them to get out of the taxi. I've read that Emma kicked James inside the taxi, and I've also read that James was on top of Emma inside the taxi. Either which way, they was kicked out and had to walk home. Just before 1:15 in the morning, CCTV recorded James push Emma Jayne, causing her to fall to the floor. Now, that's how most of the sources put it. But if you watch on YouTube, you'll be able to see it was quite aggressive, or at least it looked it from the angle of the CCTV. As a solicitor says, it appears that James charges from out of nowhere, from out of sight. He grabs Emma around the shoulders and pushes her to the ground. About 1 minute later, they walk off holding hands, with James just slightly in front. There was also various witnesses that heard them arguing loudly on the way home. When they got back to Emma's house, she went off and went inside. James followed, and then he started banging on the door. That went on for about 10 minutes, and he was asking to be let in. Although it's claimed that the door was never actually locked. A neighbour did become aware of James banging on the door, and Emma shouted, "I'm not letting you in after last time." And as a result of James banging on the door, forensics also found black marks left on the door. Shortly afterwards, James called a friend and told him that Emma was kicking off. Some neighbours were also awoken by the arguing in the early hours, and one heard James say, "My heart is bleeding," and they apparently noticed blood on his upper clothing. It was between 10 minutes past 1 and 1:30 in the early hours of that morning that Emma had stabbed James. Not long after that, she then put the knife that she'd used to stab him in the bin the rubbish bin of a neighbouring house, which happened to be Kevin's, James's brother's. After being stabbed, James tried to make his way to his brother's house, but he collapsed in the street. He got up, staggered about a bit, made some groaning noises, and then fell back onto the street. Emma took his blood-stained t-shirt and put it inside the house. And while he's laid on the street groaning, Emma's apparently pulling at his arm and trying to get him to come inside. Trying to persuade him to come inside. Kevin, James's brother, and another neighbour came and helped James. By helping, I mean they carried him into Emma's house and put him inside. They had no idea at that point that he'd been fatally injured. And throughout all this time, Emma said a lot of things. These included he'd been on the beer, been on the inn, and that he had been beaten up by the bouncers in town. He's coked up. He's putting it on. He came home like this. And he's been taking drugs. He's asleep. He's snoring. He's snoring. He's been taking coke. He's on drugs. He's dead from drinking. He's fine. He's just drunk. Some or a lot of that was actually shouted. But then it was said in court that there were also evidence of her being calm, not appearing distressed, and tending to suggest there was no particular urgency in securing help for James. She was apparently perfectly calm at one stage when she said, "Come on James, let's go home," and "James, stop messing about." After his brother and this neighbour had carried James into the house, seemingly in a drunken state, they left. Emma went upstairs and got changed, and she only called an ambulance 15 minutes later. Here is a short part of that 999 call.
Ambulance, tell me exactly what's happened.
I don't know. My boyfriend's here and he's making weird noises.
Right, what was he doing to make... What?
I don't know. He's got a lot of blood in him. James, look at me, please.
Do you want an ambulance to come and take him to hospital?
I don't know. Just some uproar. He's just playing me about.
Is his eyes open at all? Is he awake?
Well, serious, it looks like he's sleeping. It ain't how he normally sleeps because I live with him, so it ain't how he normally sleeps, that makes sense.
Right.
It looks like he's had a fight with someone.
We'll get someone sent over to him. It's been arranged. I mean, it might take a while, so I do apologise. It's bank holiday weekend and we're getting absolutely...
Oh no, that's fine. Don't worry about it.
You're out drinking all night?
Yeah, but I'm a bit honest, I think he took some drugs. I just think he's too smashed. That's what I think.
The full call is about 5 minutes long, but I've put that at the end of the video because it is quite a while to sit and watch halfway through a case. After the call, Emma then spoke to Jack, a different brother of James's. She told him the same story, that James had been beat up in town by the bouncers, he was in bed in a drugged up state, and that she had phoned an ambulance. At some point, she also texted Mom saying, "I've done what my dad did to you." And for the benefit of our overseas viewers, bouncers refers to doormen, door security, usually in a pub or a club. It was approximately 45 minutes after James had been carried into the house that Emma ran into the street. She was screaming and shouting, "He's not breathing, help! He's dead, he's dead! He's been fighting with bouncers!" And then another call to the emergency services were made. Kevin was awoken by Emma banging on his door. She was screaming still that James was dead. And this is about 40 minutes after he'd last seen James. A neighbour called Michael also heard Emma shouting, so he came out to help. We didn't know he'd been stabbed. The body was so clean, nothing on him. And only when I gave him mouth to mouth and the second breath raised his chest, that was when Michael realised that James had a wound in his chest and immediately told the 999 operator. Then I was trying to do the CPR for another 15 minutes and she was getting in my way. Like, I want him back. I just want him to wake up. I remember telling Kev to drag her off him, and he did. He took her off so I could carry on with a mouth-to-mouth and CPR. At this point, Emma was still denying any knowledge of James being stabbed, and James Knight did die of a single stab wound to his upper left chest, but we'll talk more about that wound in the post-mortem during the court section.
Right, we come home,
Yeah.
and he'd had a fight outside Reynard's,
Yeah.
but he seemed fine. And then as soon as he come out here, he started losing consciousness. Right, babe, you're fine. And then we dragged him inside, didn't we, thinking he was unconscious.
Right.
So we dragged him inside, and then basically he was breathing heavily, but he was still alive. And then I noticed he was starting, basically, I don't know, just get him.
So you've all been out tonight?
No, I've been at home.
You've been out with him?
I don't care right now, just get
listen, we need to find out what's happened. I don't care as long as he's alive.
What it is? Yeah, come on.
I'm going to get some tape and seal it off. Just get some tape. Sorry.
Yeah, what we got so far?
No, they're working on him in there. This is the girlfriend.
I'm the neighbour. Okay. Yeah, I was just giving you resuscitation for 15 minutes until they came. Okay, do you know what's happened?
I want my boy.
I went to pick my mate from Birmingham Airport. Okay. Came, let's say, 45 minutes ago. And I seen him lying on the floor.
James, have you got my torch?
He's breathing, everything like that. We didn't know until we just...
Right, we need to clear here. We've got blood here. Watch where you are because you're standing in blood. Yeah, okay, well, watch where you're going because I'm going to tape it off. I'm just going to get some tape. Yeah. Just going to get some tape.
When the paramedics arrived and started attending to James, Inspector Kirk spoke to Emma. According to him, he asked her to tell him what had happened, and she said that they'd been arguing in town, and when she got home, she saw him outside. He had blood on his face, and she believed that he'd been fighting in town. She spoke with Kevin, and they both dragged him inside. She went upstairs, got changed, but then when James failed to join her upstairs, she went back downstairs into the living room, and at that point, she saw him unresponsive. He did make a noise like ugh, and this is when she went outside and raised the neighbours. Apparently, Emma had also phoned her grandmother, who got a taxi straight there. She arrived just as the ambulance had taken James, and she told the press, "There are police everywhere." Eventually they let me go through, and she walked down the road to me. All she had got on was a little nightdress, no shoes, nothing. She put her head on my shoulder, crying. She noticed marks around Emma's neck, which was also noticed the following day in police custody. Emma's stepdad also arrived at the scene at 4:30 in the morning, and at this point the police are at Kevin's house. And obviously at this point the police have got no idea that it was Emma that had stabbed James, so they let her go. The stepdad took her back to his house, or her mum's house, and on the way there he obviously said, "Tell me what's happened." So she told him a very different version of events that she told the inspector. She said that she'd been in a club and James had been following her all night. They got in an argument, and then James became involved in a confrontation with the bouncers, and they pushed him out the club. When they got back to the house, they got into another argument, and they carried on fighting. At that point, he grabbed her by the arms and the throat. She panicked, grabbed a knife, and stabbed him. But she didn't mean to do it. When Emma and her stepdad got back to her mum's house, she was in tears, as you can imagine, and her mum could tell that she was very visibly drunk. And Emma said to her, "I have done something really bad," and went on to say that she thought she'd killed James. Now, let's remember the murder happened in the very early hours of the morning. So we're talking 12, 13, 14 hours later, at 6 p.m, the police found the knife in Kevin's bin. It was apparently a steak knife. So after being allowed to say goodbye to her daughter, Emma Jayne Magson was arrested and interviewed. During the interviews, Emma didn't answer any questions put to her. Instead, she provided a prepared statement. This prepared statement had been written on the 28th of March 2016, or at least that's when it was dated, and it had been written at her dictation by her solicitor. And at this point, it's probably a good time to quickly recap the two different versions of events. She's told the inspector, Inspector Kirk, that James pretty much were already in that condition when he got home. She then told her stepdad that actually it was self-defense. James had his hands around her throat. She reached out and stabbed him. I don't think this is the entire statement, but here is what a prepared statement said. When we got home, James continued to be abusive, which was getting worse. He was screaming at me, and I was shouting at him to get out of my house. He left the house, and I went to lock the door. However, before I could, he kicked the door, and then kicked me to the leg. He came back in and refused to leave. He began to push me around the front room. I made my way to the back of the house, and he followed me. Once in the kitchen, he grabbed me around my throat and pushed me against the side where the sink is. He is very strong and held on to my throat. I couldn't move or get away from him. I thought the assault on me would get worse. I was right next to the sink and reached out to grab something. Due to the way that he was holding my throat, I could not see what was in the sink. I picked up the first thing which came to hand, which was a steak knife with a plastic handle. The knife was in my hand and I hit out once. It happened so quickly, I can't be sure exactly how it happened. I didn't mean to harm him, I just wanted him to get off me. James then let go of me, but carried on shouting at me. He was wearing a white top, but I didn't notice any blood. He then said he was going to his brother's, and was going to take my money and my phone, which was on the floor in the living room. He picked them up, but threw them on the floor before leaving. I then went outside and saw him go on the floor outside his brother Kevin's. He didn't collapse. He seemed to put himself to the floor and lie down. I still had the knife in my hand and I walked over to him. I put the knife in Kevin's bin. I didn't notice any injury or blood and thought he was drunk. He appeared similar to how he was in the past when he had been drunk. I knocked on Kevin's door and he came out. Me and Kevin brought James back into the house. I still didn't see any blood, and I don't think Kevin did either, as when he brought James back to mine, he left him in the front room and went home. James was left on his front. I told James I was going to bed and he should come upstairs. As he was no longer being abusive, I thought he would come up and sleep it off, like he usually does. I went upstairs and changed. I had been wearing a nude coloured shirt and grey top and changed into my night clothes. I also removed my makeup, etc. James hadn't come up, so I went back down. James was still in the same position. I then called 999, but I still thought he was drunk and playing up. Because when I hit out of him, he was acting normally, I didn't realise the level of injury he had. I had used James's phone to call 999, as my phone had been broken and I had no battery. The operator told me to turn James over, which I did after the call ended. Only after I turned him onto his back, I could see he had gone pale and that something was seriously wrong. At this point I panicked. I can't exactly say what happened next, although I recall going outside. So 7 months later, in October 2016, the 3-week trial took place at Leicester Crown Court. It was the prosecution's case that Emma had lost her temper when James had tried to get into the house. So she armed herself with a knife, and as she opened the door, she stabbed him through the chest. So still at a distance, this case has 2 opposing sides. It was either self-defence, done in the kitchen, in which case it would be a manslaughter charge, or it was an angry attack done at the front door, which would be a murder charge. So let's start with a post-mortem. James died of a single stab wound to his upper left chest. It was 11.5 centimetres deep, which is about 4.5 inches. The wound entered and exited his left lung. It also penetrated his pericardial sac and left ventricle, along with a low pressure pulmonary artery. It's said that the knife that was used was a very sharp at the tip, so it didn't require that much force. Mild to moderate force would have been used or would have been necessary to cause that wound. The pathologist said the wound would not have been instantly fatal. However, James would have become increasingly out of breath and he would have died within a few minutes. However, evidence such as him heard groaning in the background of the emergency call does clearly show that he did survive for some time after the attack. The pathologist also said that because of the nature of this injury, there quite possibly weren't a lot of visible blood. There weren't a lot of external bleeding. James also had no defensive injuries. Toxicology showed that James had taken cocaine, cannabis and anabolic steroids, or at least they were all in his system at the time of his death, and his blood alcohol level was twice the drink driving limit. An examination of Emma revealed bruises to the front of the neck and 1 bruise to the front left of her upper thigh. She also had acrylic nails and hair extensions, but neither of them had been damaged. The prosecution also argued that Emma's bruises could have been caused from when she fell over on the way home. Now, I just want to add here, because that's very typically misleading, that I think they're referring to when she was pushed over. Now, I read in one court document that the jury was told the forensic evidence indicated that the wound was inflicted on the doorstep and James fell to the ground. Now, instantly I thought, well, what forensic evidence is that? Because the pathologist has said there wouldn't have been a lot of external bleeding, it wouldn't have been very forceful, so I kind of thinking, well, where is this forensic evidence? But I'm not forensic trained, so I just kind of left that thought aside. However, the final appeal document says quite the opposite. A scientific examination of the house was undertaken. No damage was found to the locks on the front door. There were marks to the door and no sign of disturbance in the house. Pooled and dripped blood was seen in the sitting room at the front of the house. It was not possible to provide scientific evidence to show wherein or outside the house the wound had been inflicted. So there is no evidence of where this wound occurred. And that is a major thing in this case. The prosecution also suggested that the reason Emma had lied at the scene about what she'd done and she told the emergency services it wasn't urgent was to prevent him from getting timely help. She was trying to delay everything while making it look like she were trying to help. The defence served a report from a consultant forensic psychiatrist dated the 9th of September 2016. The report concluded that Emma had EUPD, which is emotionally unstable personality disorder, or she may have had borderline personality disorder. The doctor wasn't able to give a formal diagnosis, but in his view, Emma was clearly on the autistic spectrum. The prosecution also brought in their own forensic psychiatrist, and they concluded that although Emma had traits of EUPD, they were not of the severity that would warrant a formal diagnosis. He also disagreed about Emma being on the autistic spectrum. So with these two polar opposite opinions, no psychiatric evidence was called before the jury. The prosecution then served evidence of previous violence from Emma towards James and claimed that she was of bad character. Throughout the trial, Emma didn't give evidence. Instead, she relied on a prepared statement that we heard from earlier. An application was made to allow the jury to decide the case of loss of control, diminished responsibility, but the judge ruled against it. So the jury basically had to decide whether Emma was acting in self-defense or not. If she wasn't, then they had to decide whether her intention was to kill and or really seriously harm, which is a sentence for murder, or if her intention was to cause harm with less severity, which would have been manslaughter. And again, obviously a massive deciding factor to that is where James was stabbed. And that's just something we can't know, we don't know. At the time of the murder, Emma Jayne Magson was 23-year-old and James Knight was 26-year-old. It was on the 4th of November 2016 at the Crown Court at Leicester that the jury found Emma Jayne Magson guilty of murder. As the verdict was read to the court, there were cheers in the public gallery, as well as people crying. The judge said Emma's previous violent behaviour was an aggravating factor. These included two examples of her punching a girl outside a nightclub in 2011 and a separate incident the following year that Emma had punched and kicked a girl and put a glass into another girl's face. 3 days later, on the 7th of November 2016, Emma was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 17 years. But hold on, because this case is far from over. Emma tried to appeal a conviction on the basis that the judge didn't allow the partial defence of loss of control. Then a single judge refused leave on the 4th of April 2017. Now, refusing leave basically means that they've rejected your application to appeal. Now, this is where I had to get my study cap on and learn a bit more about the appeal process. I read, during the process of applying for permission to appeal, the application and grounds of appeal will be considered by a single judge. If permission is refused and the application is renewed, the same documents will be considered by a full court of appeal. Well, Emma Jayne's appeal was renewed to the full court and two grounds had been added on the basis of fresh evidence. The first ground was her conviction was unsafe because of her pervasive development disorder, PDD, which caused a vulnerability that had the consequence that she needed to be supported during these proceedings, during the court, during the trial, by an intermediary. A particular feature of that disorder is that she suffers from impairment of verbal skills. The second ground was that she should have been convicted of manslaughter on the basis of diminished responsibility under Section 52, the Homicide Act 1957. Then on the 22nd of November 2018, the application was granted leave, which basically means it's been granted. But before this stage, there had been quite a few changes. First of all, Emma now had the support of Justice for Women, which in their own words are a feminist campaign organisation that supports and advocates on behalf of women who have fought back against or killed violent men. She also had new legal representatives who had a good track record with helping women who have killed their abusive partners in self-defence. And for what it's worth, this new team was working pro bono, but Emma's mom still started a crowdfunding campaign aiming to raise £5,000 to go towards their costs. In total, the campaign raised £6,515, donated by 156 people. This new super team secured the assistance of a new chartered consultant clinical psychologist, and it was this psychologist that really changed the game. She provided a first report on the 24th of January 2018, and it was updated on the 28th of January 2019. In her report, she outright diagnosed Emma with EUPD, as very similar to the defence consultant forensic psychiatrist in the previous trial. She also reported that Emma presented as somebody who functions as a significantly younger person than her actual age indicates. She is immature and egocentric. She also struggles with imagination and creativity. This report also went on to say verbal reasoning is in the very low ability range, but her non-verbal reasoning is significantly more advanced, making her situation notably unusual. It also stated that she has significant mood swings, and during the analysis, Emma and her mom provided cognate descriptions of pervasive and functionality impairing emotional dysregulation and instability, possible dissociative episodes, poor impulse control, disordered attachments with very strong feelings of abandonment when a close relationship ends. So as I stated as the first ground for the appeal, a big part of this appeal is based on whether Emma was actually fit to stand trial unaided. And this doctor basically reported that Emma should be able to participate in court if reasonable and adequate modifications to the trial process and procedures, for example the use of simple vocabulary and unambiguous concrete language, and more scaffolding being put in place than is needed for most witnesses when giving evidence. It was also reported that Emma was assessed as being high risk to suggestibility. The original consultant forensic psychiatrist who'd assessed Emma before a trial and stated that she was fit to stand trial submitted a new report. That basically said this new doctor had been able to assess Emma's neurodevelopment difficulties in much greater detail than was possible during the 2016 assessment. He accepted the new doctor's diagnosis of PDD, and he now reached the view that Emma's EUPD, almost by definition, would affect one's ability to exercise self-control in a conflict situation. In summary, he basically agreed with everything and said that the EUPD and the PDD would explain her later conduct and admissions. More importantly, this basically puts the diminished responsibility case right on the centre of the table. Now, if you think that's a game changer, even the consultant forensic psychiatrist called in by the prosecution fell into line. In their 2016 report, it claimed that Emma did have EUPD traits, although they weren't sufficient enough to warrant a diagnosis. But now he's saying that basically, yeah, okay, she's got EUPD and PDD. So ultimately, as I said, this new trial was ordered, and new evidence was allowed to be passed on to the judge, who would then determine whether it was allowed to be used in the trial. However, following a 7-week trial in Birmingham Crown Court on the 5th of March 2021, after 13 hours worth of deliberations, Emma Jayne Magson was once again found guilty of murder by a majority verdict of 10-2. She received the same life sentence, life in prison with a minimum of 17 years. She will not be eligible for parole until the 3rd of November 2023. They did appeal again. This time it was whether the direction given to the jury on the question of self-defence was adequate, and whether the judge should have included the householder defence. Now, the householder defence is basically what it says on the tin. It's where the accused were defending themselves from other people inside a dwelling, but that's usually reserved for when you're defending yourself against an intruder. On the 29th of July 2022, the appeal against the conviction was dismissed, and a renewed application for leave to appeal against the sentence was refused. During one of the sentences, one of the judges said, "I am sure that until the week of his death, he had not shown any physical violence towards you. On the contrary, I am sure such physical acts of violence which had taken place during your relationship were ones which you were responsible, including striking him with a hoover pipe and stabbing him in the chest with an item of cutlery." Now, unlike usual, I've decided I'm not going to do the victim impact statements. Firstly, this is because the kid says some really heartbreaking things, and although that's not a good enough reason on its own, the second reason is we already know this has shattered 3 families. 4 families if you include Emma and her daughter as a family on their own. And I don't want the impact statements to impair your ability, or even more importantly, my ability to see this case unbiasedly. We all know that we'll only ever half be able to imagine the amount of pain and anguish this has caused that'll last for longer than we could imagine. We can't imagine what they've gone through, and reading the victim impact statements isn't going to change that. Now, if you don't want to listen to me ramble on for a minute, but you do want to listen to the 999 call, that is at the end. If I remember to do so, it should be in the chapters, so you can just click on it and say exactly where it is. But I don't intend to take too long. This was an incredibly difficult case to write. I always try to be as unbiased as possible while writing the cases. I know some opinions do slip in, but in this case, I felt that extra pressure to be as unbiased and as fair as possible. Even as I'm speaking now, I'm still feeling that pressure. I'm still feeling like I'm going to be watched and judged. I want both Emma's family and James's family to feel that their case has been represented fairly. I mean, it's not very often that the perpetrators' families actively seek out and actively speak out and try and get the sentence overturned. But then I figured, well, I've still got to cover this case. I feel like I've got a duty to cover this case. And there's a few reasons for that, and they're the reasons I still always do these cases. First of all, this case is unique in a lot of ways. I have a duty, or I feel I have a duty, to raise awareness of different types of cases in different circumstances. That's how we can learn, that's how we can adapt, that's how we can improve as a society, make everyone better, make everyone safer. And secondly, I always feel like I have a duty to raise awareness of the people involved, in the memory of the victims, and for awareness of the perpetrators. But that's another way that this case is unique, because although in this case Emma's family do agree that Emma did stab James, they do agree that Emma caused James Knight's death, they are still adamant she only did it because she was scared for her life. Now that does happen. There is cases out there. Like I've said, there is a lawyer that specialises in it. Justice for Women, are they called? They're an entire organisation that focuses on helping them women. And I get that happens and I get that's real. However, in this case, I wasn't there. You wasn't there. James's family wasn't there. Emma's family wasn't there. None of the friends were there. Nobody knows, even the forensic scientists, nobody can figure out when, why, and how. And I want you to remember that while you're putting your thoughts in the comments. As always, you are very welcome to, and I do look forward to reading what you think about it. But something that you probably don't realise is quite often people's families do comment. The perpetrators, the victims, the families do comment or they email me. Most often they're quite nice, but sometimes they're not. But regardless of what they're like, it's our duty to know that they're going to be reading. It's our duty to be sensitive. So please, today, make sure you follow the disclaimer. Be sensitive. Don't outright be blaming. Just be sensitive and just bearing in mind that you might be talking directly to somebody who is related to one of the above. So if you don't mean it, don't say it. And I think that comes even more because last week, not the last video because but the video that I've just published before I'm recording this, I, for the first time ever, had to delete comments because it weren't the usual people, but people that have come to the channel that thought it were okay to post things that just weren't. And I don't delete comments. Even if I don't like it, it's free speech. I'll let your opinion be heard. But they were just not nice comments that didn't need to be said. It weren't an opinion. It was just vile. So for the first time ever, I've had to delete comments. Much respect to you guys that always comment and never put anything nasty. This case demonstrates a really good reason to do what I've always told you to do, and that is to document violence and document abuse. Because even if that is down to sending a text message to your mom saying what's happened, or your sister, or to the police, or writing it in a diary that's locked in a safe, it doesn't really matter as long as you document it. And I know after you've died or whatever else, it might not help that much, but this is why you report these things, because then when something does happen, it's easier to catch the perpetrator. If there was a long list of reports to the police that James had been abusive to Emma, or vice versa, this would have been a much easier trial. It would have been easier for Emma's family to deal with, and it would have been easier for James's family to deal with. So, as I always say, keep a track, keep a record. Now, I feel that I do have to put my thoughts into this. I can't ask for yours and not give you mine. And you know, throughout this case, I've gone side to side, as I've gone through different parts of evidence. The texts, Emma's track record, the psychoanalysis, all the other points that show that Emma was capable of outbursts and hitting people. They paint her less as a victim. They paint her as if she could have just stabbed him in anger. But the psychoanalysis that also works against her also works in a benefit. It kind of does justify what she said and how she said it and what she did after the events. The fact that James kicked off at the pub and the police had to be called. The fact that he was apparently on top of Emma in the taxi. The CCTV from after the taxi. And the cocktail of drugs in James's system. They all suggest that Emma could have been telling the truth. There is so much evidence for and against Emma and for and against James. There's just so much evidence that suggests both sides. And I am not surprised at all that the jury didn't find her unanimously guilty. Halfway through writing this case, I were going to go through little bit by little bit and analyse it at the end. But then I dawned that it's not my job to do that. I'm not the judge, I'm not the jury. I am just somebody reporting this case to you. So I'm not going to do that. And my conclusion has come to a final thing of no matter how many true crime documentaries you watch, no matter where you watch them, be it TV, YouTube, podcast or whatever, that last trial was 7 weeks long. No documentary is ever going to get every last bit of detail from that. The juries had to listen to that information. And after 2 trials, even though they weren't unanimous, they both returned a guilty verdict. And that has to mean something. As is pretty much always, there is children in this case. 3 of them, whose lives have absolutely been destroyed and affected by this case. There's 4 families, who have been turned upside down completely. And my heart hopefully goes out to them. My only conclusion here is that of the courts. This was a very volatile, very toxic relationship. And I know so many of you are in the same situation. All relationships have troubled times. And it's never okay to hit each other or be hit or hit somebody. Do not allow it. Have the self-respect. Have the strength. And something that I don't say very often, if there is anger, if there is tension, and there's alcohol or drugs involved, please do make sure you distance yourself from each other until things have calmed down. In the 3 years leading up to 2022, 1 in 3 homicides in the UK involved the victim or the suspect being under the influence of alcohol. That is staggering. And I'm going to leave it at that. Next up is the call to 999. All I'm saying is I love you. Take care of yourself. Take care of those around you. And I'll see you next week. Bye.
One ambulance.
Ambulance, tell me exactly what's happened.
I don't know. My boyfriend's here and he's making weird noises. I don't know what's going on.
Right, what was he doing to make... What?
I don't know. He's got a lot of blood on him. James, look at me, please. James, just look at me. James, just turn round, please. I don't know if he's playing around or he's got some up with him. James, turn round. James, I've got the ambulance on the phone. Please, just turn around so I know what's up with you. James? Right, listen, the ambulance is on the phone, so can you please turn around or let me know what's going on? Please, turn around. He's not doing... Now he's stopped making noises, I don't know. No, he's doing fine. He's just come home. He's come home to me.
Yeah.
So I've been out all night, and then he's come home to me, and then he's just collapsed on my floor. And then now he was fine about up till 5 minutes ago, and he's just started making noises. Now he stopped, and now I'm on the phone to you.
And is he awake and breathing and...
Yeah, he's breathing.
Okay.
No, he's breathing fine. It's like he's asleep, but I don't know why he's making the noises. I don't know if he's done it for my sake or for what. Like, James? James? What? Now it's just like he's asleep.
Right, and so do you want an ambulance to come and take him to the hospital?
I don't know. I don't know if there's something up with him or he's just playing me about. But now I'm on the phone too, he's just shut up.
Right.
What should I do?
I can't tell you. I'm not there. Then I don't know what you want me to do. The only thing I can do is just send an ambulance to come and take him to the hospital if that's what he wants.
Yeah, do that please.
Right, okay, so just bear with me then.
James, an ambulance is coming, okay? Well, he's fucking breathing like normal, but an ambulance is coming, okay?
What's your address?
25 Sylvan Street.
What's your postcode?
LE3.
Yep.
9GU.
GU, yeah?
Yeah.
You say Sylvan Street, yeah?
Yeah, Sylvan.
25.
Yeah.
How old is he?
26, 27. Born in 1990. James.
Is his eyes open at all? Is he awake?
Well, to be honest, it looks like he's sleeping, but it ain't how he normally sleeps because I live with him, so it ain't how he normally sleeps, that makes sense.
Right.
It looks like he's had a fight with someone.
Okay.
James, I think he's ignoring me on purpose, if I'm honest with you.
Right, okay.
Fuck's sake. James, police are on the way. He's just breathing.
Right.
You can hear the police are on the way. No. Ignore me.
Okay. What's his date of birth? Do you know it?
Yeah, we do. The 31st.
Yeah.
The 12th.
Yeah.
1989.
Alright, well, we'll get someone sent over to him. It's been arranged. I mean, it might take a while, so I do apologise. It's bank holiday weekend and we're getting absolutely...
No, that's fine. Don't worry about it.
I mean, if you can, just keep doing...
Well, it looks like he's just a fucking sleep, but you know what? It's a bit worrying because normally he gets up and get in bed.
Yeah. Has he been out drinking all night?
Yeah, if I'm a bit honest, I think he took some drugs.
Right, okay.
I don't know though.
How's he lay at the minute? Is he on his front, back, side? How is he lying?
He's on his front at the minute. He's on his front, the head's on the front, and the hands are on the front, so what do I do?
But, I mean, we do try and say get him on his side, because if he's on his front, that's going to... I don't know, I'm just... Yeah, I don't want to leave him on his front, because it's not good to be lying on his front. He can't breathe properly.
It seems peaceful on his front, but at the same time he don't. But I don't know.
Can you get him on his side? If you try and move him, will he respond?
I bet I could when I'm off the phone, yeah.
Right, try and put him on his side. Alright, if he does wake up, just reassure him.
Do you know what? I just think he's too smashed. That's what I think.
Yeah. Well, that's why...
But I need to be on the safe side, like, it's my boyfriend, so...
Oh, yeah, I mean, like I say, if he has, try and get him on his side, because if he vomits, he'll choke on it, lying on his front.
Okay, then.
And that's bad.
Personally, that's what I think he's done. If anything, he's took coke, because I know him.
Right, but, yeah, I mean, try and get him on his side for me.
Alright, then.
No matter what, don't give him anything to eat or drink, because if he has taken anything else, it can react to it, yeah?
Alright, then.
If you have any problems or his breathing changes or anything like that, make sure everything is straight away, yeah?
Okay, then, thank you.
Alright, no worries, thank you.
Alright, thank you, bye.
Bye.